Hello there and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is L24 News, streaming live from the capital Algiers. I'm Abdurrahim Kashour, and to the headlines. As the Ukraine-Russia conflict shifts its focus to the country's east and south, Kiev is calling on NATO countries to provide all the weapons it says it needs to push back Russian forces. President Joe Biden unveiled a new rule to rein in so-called ghost guns and banned the manufacturing of the untraceable weapons on Monday as the administration faces growing pressure to crack down on gun deaths. Zionist forces shot 3 Palestinians in a series of confrontations across Palestine and the occupied West Bank on Sunday, killing 2 citizens, including an unarmed woman. Indonesia's parliament passed on Tuesday a long-awaited bill to tackle sexual violence, intended to provide a legal framework for victims to secure justice in the country, where sexual abuse has often been regarded as a private matter. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby stated on a press conference that Russia is repositioning its forces in the Ukrainian eastern city of Donbass. Ukrainian authorities stated also that Russia is preparing for launching a wider-range attack as a convoy of Russian vehicles had been observed heading toward the town of Izum, about 180 kilometers north of the city of Donetsk. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, on his last statement, pleaded Kiev's Western allies to provide him with more weapon aid as Russia was seen repositioning its forces near the east of Ukraine. According to reports, Russian forces are preparing for launching a new military operation.
Supplying the necessary weapons to Ukraine means not only saving the lives of our people, not only giving us the opportunity to liberate our cities, especially Mariupol, which has suffered for so long, but also saving other states and other regions in the face of the new deployment of Russian aggression.
Following his visit to Moscow, first from European leaders since Russia started the military operation in Ukraine on the 24th of February, and no optimism to draw from his meeting. This is how Australian Chancellor Karl Nehammer described his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I have no optimistic impression that I can bring you from this conversation with President Putin. The offensive is obviously being massively prepared, but therefore also the clear commitment that a stable access to the International Red Cross is needed.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has said on Monday night that Russia could resort to chemical weapons as it amassed troops in the eastern Donbass region for a new assault on Mariupol. And verified reports from the besieged southeastern port city Azov troop said a poisonous substance of unknown origin was released, causing breathing issues, respiratory failure. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said her department is working with partners to verify the claims, and she vowed to hold Putin to account over the potential attack. The UK's Minister of Defence tweeted in a regular bulletin on Tuesday that the fighting in eastern Ukraine will heat up during the next 2 to 3 weeks as Russia refocuses its efforts there. According to the British military intelligence, Russian strikes on Ukrainian forces in Donetsk and Luhansk continue, with further combat around Kherson and Mykolaiv and a fresh drive toward Kramatorsk. The source also said Russian soldiers are still withdrawing from Belarus in order to redeploy in support of operation in eastern Ukraine. The United Nations is increasingly hearing accounts of rape and sexual violence in Ukraine. A senior UN official told the Security Council as a Ukrainian human rights group accused Russian troops of using rape as a weapon of war.
The UN Security Council has heard that rape is being used as a weapon of war in Ukraine in a session focusing on how the war has impacted women and children.
We are increasingly hearing of rape and sexual violence. These allegations must be independently investigated to ensure justice and accountability. The combination of mass displacement with the large presence of conscripts and mercenaries and the brutality displayed against Ukrainian civilians has raised all red flags.
The UN Children's Fund says nearly two-thirds of all Ukrainian children have been displaced and forced to leave their homes, schools, and often their family members.
Inside Ukraine, children and families and communities are under attack. Of the 3.2 million children estimated to have remained in their homes, nearly half may be at risk of not having enough food.
Human rights defenders in Ukraine accuse Russian troops of directly targeting civilians, including charges of kidnapping, torture, sexual violence, and death.
Reports from Kievska, Khersonska, and Chernigivska Oblast, reported by the survivors themselves and by the witnesses, raped by a group of occupants multiple times with life threat to survivors, their children, their family members, in front of the family members and other people.
Russia's first deputy permanent representative to the UN denied the accusations by the Ukrainian side. He said Russia has been caught up in an information war and all the crimes were pinned on Russia without convincing evidence.
No convincing evidence has been presented for any of these crimes, but it is understandable that you have trampled on the resumption of innocence a long time ago.
On the other hand, Ukraine's UN ambassador told the Security Council that the Prosecutor General's Office of Ukraine was launching a special mechanism of documentation of cases of sexual violence by Russian soldiers against Ukrainian women.
European Union ministers discussed in Luxembourg a sixth package of sanctions against Russia, including an embargo on oil and gas imports. Together with that, EU countries reaffirmed that the bloc will continue to provide assistance to Ukraine in all areas, such as defense capabilities, social and humanitarian aid, and reception of refugees in the European Union. The European Union has warned that Russia's intervention in Ukraine is putting the world on the brink of a food crisis. Joseph Borrell, head of European diplomacy, told reporters after a meeting of EU foreign ministers in Luxembourg that Russia is causing world hunger by destroying wheat stocks and preventing it from being exported abroad.
They are causing scarcity. They are bombing the Ukrainian cities and provoking hunger in the world.
Finland announced it was getting ready for historic decision before the midsummer on whether to apply for NATO membership as a deterrent against Russia's military operation. Its neighboring country, Sweden, has also begun debating whether the country should join NATO. Both countries are not aligned. However, public support for NATO membership is increasing, with 50% in Sweden and 60% in Finland, and Moscow opposed the enlargement of the alliance, warning that it will not bring stability to Europe. In an hour-long video call between the US President Joe Biden and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, both leaders discussed the growing international concern over the conflict in Ukraine following the last massacres that happened in the country. Nabil Khazini has more to clarify.
The conflict in Ukraine continues to take an important share during the meetings of world leaders. US President Joe Biden met virtually with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. 48 days after its beginning, India refuses to condemn the Russian military operation in Ukraine.
Our continued consultation and dialogue are key to ensuring the US-Indian relationship continues to grow deeper and stronger.
I spoke on the phone several times to the presidents of Ukraine and Russia. I not only appealed for peace, but I also suggested that there will be direct talks between President Putin and the President of Ukraine.
Given the current circumstances, Ukraine now plays a central role in the global security order. For the United States, countries must push the Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the conflict.
In our judgment, it is important that all countries, especially those with leverage, press Putin to end the war.
The question of India's energy purchases from Russia was discussed in the 4th +2+ dialogue between India and the United States. India's External Affairs Minister, Subrahmanyam Jaishankar, says the focus should be more on Europe rather than on his country.
If you are looking at energy purchases from Russia, I would suggest that your attention should be focused on Europe.
Russia and India both call their relation a special and privileged strategic partnership. India is the second largest market for the Russian defense industry. The two countries set a target of reaching $30 billion in bilateral trade by 2025.
US President Joe Biden announces a decree against so-called ghost weapons, which are difficult to spot in the absence of a serial number and can be mounted at home in just a few minutes. According to his decree, spare parts that can be easily assembled into a functional firearm will be subject to the same requirements as already assembled firearms available for purchase. Nokia CEO Pekka Landmark told Reuters that the telecoms equipment maker is pulling out of the Russian market. The Finnish giant had already suspended deliveries to Russia in early March, but Nokia said it has now completely exited the country. Nokia's move came a day after the Swedish company Ericsson said it has indefinitely suspended its business in Russia. On Monday, Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune held private talks with Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, who was on a visit to Algeria at the invitation of the President Abdelmajid Tebboune. This visit falls within the framework of strengthening cooperation relations between the two countries. Zara Farjani on What Follow.
Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi was on a visit to Algeria in order to strengthen cooperation relations between the two countries.
It's a pleasure to be in Algeria. I would like to thank President Tebboune on the warm reception. Our relationship with Algeria is strong, and we are looking forward to develop it.
This visit was fruitful in all aspects. The main field of the signed agreements was energy, in which Algeria would take the role of strong negotiator and impose its conditions on Italy to raise gas supplies and increase the volume of exported gas using the available capacities of the gas pipeline Enrico Mattei.
A memorandum of understanding has been signed, especially in the field of energy. Sonatrach and Eni have signed an agreement to increase the volume of Algerian gas exported to Italy. Our country is also counting on Algeria's assistance in developing renewable energies.
The pricing of natural gas exported to Rome was also an important focus in the agreement, after Sonatrach and its partner Eni agreed to determine the levels of leasing sales of natural gas in line with the international market data and what is imposed by contractual agreement related to price review for the year 2022-2023. The cooperation between Algerian company Sonatrach and its Italian counterpart Eni also focused on renewable energies and the emphasis on expanding partnership in the field of solar energy and green hydrogen by launching prominent projects in the near future. The new projects will allow the Italian company to strengthen its presence in the Algerian market, to raise the volume of Algerian exports of natural gas to Italy to 300 billion cubic meters during the last 2 decades until today. These quantities confirm the depth of the relationship and trust between Algeria and Italy over decades.
To a different matter now, Iran expresses its doubts about the will of the United States to reach an agreement on its nuclear program, citing divergences that persist despite a year of discussions to relaunch the pact concluded in 2015 between Tehran and 6 major powers.
We don't really know whether we will get an agreement or not, because the US has not shown the will to reach an agreement, but we are determined to reach a good agreement, and if we do, we will certainly go to Vienna tomorrow. The discussions between Iran and Europe and with the countries involved in the agreement, France, Germany, Great Britain, China and Russia, have been finalized and there are no more points to discuss. What remains are the decisions of Washington.
The Zionist occupier launched the new operations across the occupied West Bank on Monday, where it focused its assault on civilians, causing many deaths, arresting 13 people and about 30 in a week. According to the Palestinian Red Crescent, 24 people were injured on Monday in the northern West Bank, including one with live ammunition. Shahbaz Sharif was sworn in Pakistan's new Prime Minister, succeeding Imran Khan, who was ousted on Sunday. Sharif was elected earlier in the day by the country's parliament. Islam Seed has more to tell.
Now I request Mia Muhammad Shahbaz Sharif Sahab to please take the seat of the Prime Minister of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan.
Shahbaz Sharif won 174 votes in 342-seat assembly and was elected Prime Minister of Pakistan on Monday during a session of the National Assembly boycotted by the opposition. He succeeds Mr. Khan, who was overthrown on Sunday by a motion of censure as the first in the country's history. The session was boycotted by the vast majority of Mr. Khan's party deputies, who also announced their resignation from the assembly.
This is the first time in history that the vote of the motion of censure has succeeded. It is a victory of justice, and evil has been defeated.
He is considered less charismatic than his brother Nawaz, but also less rigid and more likely to make the necessary compromises to stay in power. He was the most acceptable leader of the opposition in the eyes of the army, which remains the key to political power in this country, having spent more than 3 decades under his leadership.
We need dialogue, not a dead end, if we want to move this democratic process and the economy forward.
The future Prime Minister will have to maintain the cohesion of his camp, but also deal with the difficult economic situation of the country, with high inflation and the rupee's constant decline. The deterioration of security, with the increase of attacks carried out by the Pakistani Taliban, will also be one of his main concerns. Imran Khan claimed to be the victim of the regime change conducted by the United States with the complicity of the opposition, because he criticized the American policy in Iraq or Afghanistan. Shahbaz Sharif pledged on Monday to open a parliamentary investigation into these allegations and immediately resign if any evidence revealed against his coalition.
The first MiG-15S, which had served during the Korean War, arrived from Soviet Union in 1955. After the break with Moscow, Beijing sent fighters until the end of relations with Tirana in 1978. These fighters' jets and planes have been left on his air base in the Albanian city of Kosovo for almost 17 years after they were put out of the service in 2005. Usama Yadi on What Follow.
In the former city of Stalin in Albania, dozens of old Soviet and Chinese MiGs rust in the open air on what was a communist military base. But the site will soon be reborn from its ashes in the form of a gleaming NATO air base.
Once called the city of Stalin, Kosovo now hosts a NATO base, whereas, once facing east, we now belong alongside the West.
Since the fall of the communist regime in 1990, after decades of dictatorship, Stalin has reverted to its old name Kosovo. The small Balkan country has resolutely turned towards the West, joined NATO in 2009, and wishes more than anything to join the European Union. The Atlantic Alliance began this year to restore the former airbase of Kosovo in the center of the country to make it an operational infrastructure in the Balkans, a fragile region where fears of destabilization are increased tenfold after the invasion of Ukraine by the Kremlin.
The transformation of the Kosovo airbase into a NATO tactical base not only helps Albania's military strength, but also represents support for the stability and security for the Western Balkans.
In project on the base of 350 hectares, the restoration of a track of more than 2 kilometers long, the modernization of the control tower and the construction of new storage unit, explained the Albanian soldiers. Meanwhile, dozens of decrepit hunters languish in the spring sunshine in a valley hemmed by snow-capped mountains. The approximately 200 planes and 40 helicopters that the base had at the end of the Cold War were retired in 2005 due to obsolescence. 35 Albanian pilots have lost their lives aboard this type of aircraft during exercises.
Indonesia's parliament passed a long-awaited sexual violence bill on Tuesday, a landmark decision that raises hopes of justice for victims after the country recorded a spike in reported cases during the coronavirus pandemic. Heavy rains due to a tropical storm that fell on the archipelago triggered a landslide and floods in the village of Bonga in the central Philippines. 28 people were killed and 70,000 people fled their homes, which were buried in mud. Philippine authorities said that they are mobilizing to help the inhabitants affected by this disaster. Sri Lanka's Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa pleaded for patience Monday as thousands continue to take to the streets to protest his family's rule, with public anger at fever pitch over the country's crippling economic crisis. Marim Zian has more to tell.
Power cuts, food and life-saving medicine shortages have become what Sri Lankans wake up to every day in the country's worst downturn since independence in 1948. Protesters have rallied daily since Saturday against President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in Colombo and across the country, chanting "Gota, go home" and calling for his government's resignation.
Today, across Sri Lanka, citizens are gathering to protest because they were not even able to buy basic necessities. We are all here to protest against this government and all the groups that support it.
As a result of public anger, Sri Lanka's Prime Minister, who became a focus of the protest, pleaded for patience in his first address to the nation since the crisis.
Don't forget that the country needs your patience at this critical time.
Sri Lankans want Rajapaksa family and the government to resign. However, the parliament has failed to reach a consensus on how to deal with the crisis. The 22 million residents country is on the brink of bankruptcy, with declining foreign reserves and a $25 billion foreign debt.
Even if we can't stop this crisis in 2 or 3 days, we will solve it as quickly as possible. But every minute you protest, we lose an opportunity to make money.
Economists say the crisis has been made worse by government mismanagement, years of accumulated borrowing and ill-advised tax cuts. But the government blamed it on the coronavirus pandemic and the Russian-Ukrainian crisis.
The largest Chinese city, Shanghai, eased lockdown rule in some areas despite reporting a record of more than 25,000 new COVID-19 infections after pressure mounted on Shanghai authorities. They implemented a 3-tiered disease control system, enabling people in regions where no cases have been detected in 14 days to leave their houses as long as they follow health rules and stay in their sub-district. After the visit of the German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock to Mali in an attempt to talk to junta rebels, a bloc's chief diplomats stated that the European Union is freezing military training in the region. This comes after a shared meeting of foreign ministers from the bloc which discussed the issue.
Donc on va quitter les missions d'entraînement.
We will leave the training missions. The military training missions of troops will be practically stopped. We will continue to do advice in the training of the law of war. Coming up now to sport, bring on Real Madrid versus Chelsea. Carlo Ancelotti's side have carried out the final training session ahead of the visit of reigning League champions Chelsea, who will face Real Madrid in the second leg of the Champions League quarter-final. Karim Benzema, Thibaut Courtois, Vinicius Junior and the rest of the players took part in the tactical exercises, a training match and a shooting drill ahead of tomorrow's big match, in which they took a look book their place in the semi-finals of the Champions League.
I think that, as I said after the game, we have a lot of respect of this team because this team has a lot of quality, has a lot of fantastic skill on his play in their players, and it is the only way that we have to prepare this kind of game, thinking that Chelsea is going to show a better performance tomorrow and be ready for this. There is no other way. We are really prepared, as I said, happy to be in the quarterfinal, but we...
After claiming one of the most memorable results in the recent history in his first leg, Villarreal traveled to Bavaria to meet Bayern Munich in the second leg of the Champions League quarterfinal on Tuesday. Unai Emery's side make the journey holding 1-0 lead from the first leg, with either Benfica or Liverpool waiting the victor in the semi-finals. Bayern and Villarreal have only ever met once before at the Allianz Arena, with the German side claiming 3-1 win in 2011 Champions League group stage, and such as a performance must be replicated this week in case there are another shot of European glory go begging. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Take care of yourself and have a blessed evening.